Hello, Mr. Zmuda.
Dustin,
How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excellent. It's great to have you on.
Where are you, Minnesota?
Yep, we're in Minnesota. Can you tell by the accent?
Fantastic. Well, I got a Chicago accent, so.
Okay, not too far off then.
No.
Well, first of all, we'll ask you about your new book, Andy Kaufman, The Truth Finally. I know you've had a book out in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, the new book, Andy Kaufman, The Truth Finally. And, well, things are falling down where I'm at. It's Andy Kaufman already, shaking things up. But for your listeners, 30 years ago, Andy Kaufman supposedly died of lung cancer. At the time, 85% of the population believed he was faking it. Because Andy was known for these elaborate pranks. He wrestled Jerry the King Lawler, and supposedly Lawler almost broke his neck, and Andy wore a neck brace for 2 years, which was a bunch of BS. He created this character, an alter ego named Tony Clifton, that was done with elaborate prosthetic makeup, and everybody thought that was Andy Kaufman underneath it, when in fact it was me, Bob Zmuda, his writer of 10 years. And I'd go on shows. I'd go on David Letterman. I did David Letterman 4 times as Tony Clifton, and every time Letterman thought it was Andy Kaufman. And then finally, about 34 years ago, I pitched Andy. We were talking, what would be the greatest prank of all time? So I said, well, the greatest prank of all times would be faking your death. Oh, my God. When he heard that, he said, you're right. That's what I need to do. He said, this would be my crowning achievement. And then for 4 years, he tirelessly worked on, and both of us worked on it together, of how to pull that off. So what happened, he'd call me up and say, how do I get my hands on a cadaver? I said, Andy, medical schools, they get cadavers. You could get your hands on a cadaver, but there's going to be paperwork. People going to know you do that. So what do you have in mind? He says, well, I thought a fiery car crash. I'd have a body in there. I said, Andy, they look for dental records. He says, well, can I knock out a couple of my teeth? I said, no, they need uppers and lowers. So that ain't going to work. Then a year later, he'd call and go, well, how about I'm lost at sea? I said, Andy, everybody is looking for you in your next prank. If there's no body, nobody is going to believe it. He said, okay, well, that ain't going to work. And then, about a year after that, he came up with a brilliant idea. He says, I got it. He said, Bob, you're right. There needs to be a body. Not only is there a body, there needs to be an illness. I need to be sick for a long time. People need to be convinced that I'm really dying. So what he does, and it was brilliant, is he found a fan of his that was dying of cancer. And he worked out an arrangement with that fan, and saying, look, help me with this. Help me pull off this elaborate prank. And the guy did it. It was done with prosthetic makeup. So when the family sat around at Cedar-Sinai Hospital on May 16th, 1984, and that person died, they believed it was Andy Kaufman. No, it was a person who looked like Andy Kaufman that had died. Just last year, and you know yourself, Michael Kaufman, Andy's brother, came out with his own statement believing that his brother had faked his death. So here we are. Now, why 30 years later? Because Andy gave a time limit to this one. When asked, and remember, if you go back 30 years, he was talking to many people about faking his death. Nobody believed, back then, 30 years ago, everybody believed Andy Kaufman had faked his death. The only reason you believe it now, because he's been in hiding for 30 years. He told his girlfriend, Lynn Margulies, who's the co-author of this book, 30 years ago, when she asked, okay, Andy, you're going to fake your death. How long are you going to be gone for, a year or two? He said, no. If I was a little boy about it, it'd be a year or two. If I was going to be a man about it, it'd be 20 to 30 years. Well, 10 years ago was the 20th mark. I put on a big event at the House of Blues in L.A., thinking he was going to return then. We had that place was star-packed. He didn't show up. Now, because he said 20 or 30 years, it's 30 years. It's now or never, and he's coming back.
So when he does come back, how do you think he's going to be, received by the public?
Well, some people are going to be pissed at him. Some people, but I think once people calm down, I'm sure, Dr. Phil isn't going to be happy because for some people, listen, well, some people were crushed. He was in love with Lynn Margulies, and this is one of the things I discussed with him. I said, Andy, this is a great prank, and you're known for pranks. This girl's in love with you. What are you going to do? He says, you know what? His work, he was an artist. He said, my work comes first. It's better for Lynn to even believe that I died.
Wow.
So she could go on with her own life. And she has.
Yeah.
She's married now, happily married, and has a wonderful life, and she was able to move on with her life. But this is the kind of commitment that Andy would bring to what he did. I tell people working for Andy Kaufman, I was his writer for 10 years, was like working with Harry Houdini. You kept your mouth shut. But this one, he said, 30 years, I'm going to hold him to what he says. That's why this is the first time after 30 years that I'm coming out and saying, yes, he did fake his death. He talked to me repeatedly about it for 3 years. He talked to listen, we had worked on a screenplay for Universal Studios called The Tony Clifton Story. It's in their script vault.
Okay.
It was written, it was handed in 1981. He supposedly died in 1984. He came into the office one day with a piece of paper. He said he was up all night. We have to put this in the script. I said, what is it? Read it. He says, Tony Clifton dies of lung cancer at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. That was 1981. 4 years later, Andy Kaufman would die of lung cancer at Sinai Hospital.
Yeah.
He knew it. He knew exactly what he was going to pull off. We had a statistician do stats on that. For you to predict what hospital and what disease that you would die of is 840 million to 1. It's an impossibility. Andy Kaufman faked his death.
Yeah, definitely a crazy story, and looking forward to checking out the book. And I had a bunch of questions for you. It looks like we're almost out of time already. I want to ask you real quick, if he had not done this death hoax, do you think maybe he would have stayed with professional wrestling? He seemed like he was really into that.
Yeah, he he'd rather be a professional wrestler than anything. He loved it. When he was a little boy, his grandma would he lived in Great Neck, and she would come to New York City. She didn't take him to like a Broadway musical. She took him to Madison Square Garden to see the wrestlers, and he loved it. So to him, that was always theatrics. And what was wrestling about? Very much about what? Faking out the public.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, again, Bob, it's been great having you on, and thanks for putting this book out. Looking forward to it for sure. Thanks a lot for being on with us today, Bob.
Great. Thanks, Dustin.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.